Hello everyone, glad to be back. It's taken a little time to prepare this. I wanted to try to put it together in the most concise way. If you watched the first video in this series of the Liberty Zone videos, you've learned a little bit of intriguing information, but what we want to do today is literally get into the heart of this beast. And the fraud that they've perpetrated is probably the most egregious one and the most obvious one, even though we could spend 20 videos going into all of the code and all of the lies and fraud and deceit and obfuscation that these guys have done, willingly or unwittingly, doesn't matter. It's still criminal. So what we want to do today is go into the basic topic of what is income. And I hope that you're ready for this, because I think at the end of this series, or at least at the end of this video, you're going to be rather upset and you're going to want to know some more information. And remember, we're in a war, we are working in this together, and we're soldiers, and we have to understand that these guys, they try to chew up and spit out the individual, but they are getting racked with these types of attacks by people that are just tired of their liberties being deceived and stolen and cheated out of. And but understand, knowledge is power. So I hope you're ready for this. I hope you get a pen ready, or just watch this a few times. You can jot down the court cases you see, the quotes, and again, please pass this on, because if people don't know the truth about these things, we are helpless slaves. So let's get rolling with this. We've all been made slaves, basically, to presumptions, and those presumptions have been taught to us from grade school. Our grandparents were taught them, our parents were taught them, and we've been taught them. And it's basically presumptions about income. It's just presumed. Everyone knows income is what you take home from working all week, right? Or all month, whatever it is. That is what income is. Income is your wages, your salary, or your compensation for the work you do for your employer. Correct? Right? Yeah. If you had to fill out a form in a test, that's what you would write down, correct? Well, how do you know this? How do you know it? Because you've been told that all your life. Have you ever looked into how the IRS defines income, or any other organization or entity defines income, ever in your life? Let's look at the IRS code and see what it defines income as. Okay, 26 U.S.C. taxable income. Taxable income, except as provided in subsection B. For purposes of this subtitle, the term taxable income means gross income minus the deductions allowed by this chapter. Okay, well, let's look at 26 U.S.C. Code 62. Adjusted gross income defined. For purposes of this subtitle, the term adjusted gross income means, in the case of an individual, gross income minus the following deductions. Now, wasn't that helpful? What did you learn about the actual definition of income in those things? Well, let's look a little farther. Code of Federal Regulations 1.611. Gross income, general definition. Gross income means all income from whatever source derived unless excluded by law. And all the emphasis throughout this whole thing is mine. And let's look at what gross income means in section 22. Gross income includes gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal service. Now we'll be discussing this derived from a little later in the presentation, because it's one of the IRS's sleight of hand deceptions making us think income is something that it is not. Okay, so far we've seen income discussed by the IRS as gross income, taxable income, adjusted gross income. So now, do we know what income is? Are you any more informed as to what income actually is? Take away the gross, take away the taxable, take away the adjusted gross. Still does not define income. I know you can't get around the brainwashing, and I still struggle with it. I still use that word when I'm talking about making a living or receiving a wage or something. Wages or income have been drummed into our head, and it's hard to get around. But let's look at an example. Let's see. You get a thing in the mail that says you're told that you owe a tax on widgets. Okay? You have to pay this tax, but you don't know what a widget is. Here's your definition. Widgets are defined as gross widgets, adjusted gross widgets, and taxable widgets. There you have it. Settled law that everyone knows and accepts, so pay your taxes, okay? So now you're ready? You have no questions, right? It's plain the government is telling you that you owe a tax on these widgets. So would you simply roll over and pay this tax if you got a bill in the mail from them on widgets? Would you? Well, why not? Because you still have no idea what a widget is, and if you actually have anything to do with widgets, right? No question. The term income has been manipulated beyond imagination. Now, we could have saved ourselves some trouble in trying to define income from the government's documents. Let's look at this Supreme Court case. The general term income is not defined in the Internal Revenue Code. I wonder why that is. Well, you're going to find out. So, why do we define income as all we bring in as wages? Why do you presume that? Why did I presume it? Why does all of America presume that income is what we make every week, every month, whatever it is? All right, hold on to your hat. This is going to get intense because it's egregious what these guys have done. Let's look at what the courts, Congress, and a lot of other sources say, especially the United States Supreme Court, which is most of these quotes. This is the United States Supreme Court. Income, as defined by the Supreme Court, means, okay, here's a definition, a real, honest definition. Means gains and profits as a result of corporate activity and profit gained through the sale or conversion of capital assets. Okay. Income as defined by the Supreme Court. Let's keep looking. Let's look at this obfuscation trail. You'll be amazed at how they have twisted and perverted this over the years. We're talking 100 years. 1913 that the IRS was brought into fruition, along with the 16th Amendment and along with the Federal Reserve banking cartel. It's all a huge scam. Section 22, gross income. Gross income includes gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal service. This is a pretty clear and concise statement of gross income, isn't it? Okay. Gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal service. Now, let's look at that a little more carefully. Gross income includes gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal service. Ask yourself this. If salary, wages, and compensation for personal services are defined as income by the IRS, in other words, they mean the exact same thing, how do you derive income from income? as defined in section 22. Seems kind of stupid, doesn't it? Seems, wait a minute. Doesn't this suggest a hint of there being a difference between wages and income in law and in truth? They don't want you to know that. Let's look at the courts. Another United States Supreme Court. Income, as used in the statute, should be given a meaning so as not to include everything that comes in. The true function of the words gains and profits, as defined in the code to be the same as income, remember, under section 22, is to limit the meaning of the word income. United States, Southern Pacific. That's a clue. That's a clue. The true function of the words gains and profits is to what? Limit the meaning of the word income. Okay, but what did the IRS previously tell us? Income includes gains and profits and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal service. It's going to take you a while to wrap your head around this, but just hang in there, and you may have to go through this a couple, 2 or 3 times, or 10. It's taken years for people to get this down and perfected. So the question asked is, why did the IRS include income in the same category and meaning the same thing as gains and profits? Why indeed? Let's make it a little clearer. The true function of the words gains and profits is to limit the meaning of the word income. That was the Supreme Court case. That was their cite. It was very clear back then. However, again, section 22 equated gains and profits as the same thing as income, which somehow people derive from their wages, salary, and compensation for services. You know, you should be able to smell a skunk by now, or at least the hints of it. Derived from. Let's look at that a little bit. How does one derive income from one's wages, salary, or compensation for service if they are the same thing? Makes no sense. How do you derive income from income, as I stated? The statute and the statute alone. Another court case. Second Circuit. Not Supreme, but still has not been overturned. The statute and the statute alone determines what is income to be taxed. It taxes only income derived from many different sources. One does not derive income by rendering services and charging for them, or in other words, by receiving a wage or salary or compensation for services. One does not derive income by doing that. Now, have you ever heard that in school or from government or the IRS tax preparers or any attorney or anybody that you know in the world? Nope, I sure didn't. Let's look at some more sites. It becomes essential to distinguish between what is and what is not income. Congress, and I put in, or the IRS, may not, by any definition it may adopt, conclude the matter, since it cannot by legislation alter the Constitution, from which alone it derives its power to legislate, and within whose limitations alone that power can be lawfully exercised. Income is derived from capital, the gain derived from capital, and this is in the original. Here we have the essential matter, not gain accruing to capital, not a growth or increment of value in the investment, but a gain, a profit, something of exchangeable value severed from the capital, however invested. Now this gets a little complicated, but I think you'll understand it more later. However invested or employed, and coming in, being derived, that is received or drawn by the recipient for his separate use, benefit, and disposal. That is the income derived from property. Nothing else answers the description. The words gain and income mean the same thing. They are equivalent terms. Now remember that. The words gain, and it says in section 22, remember, gains, profit, and income. They are all equated to mean the exact same thing. Now we're getting a little closer to the truth. Let's take a look here. This is in this is the Treasury Department's own material, 1941. For 1936, taxable income tax returns filed represented only 3.9% of the population, and the largest portion of consumer incomes in the United States is not subject to the income taxation. Likewise, only a small portion of the population of the United States is covered by the income tax. Now, this here they're starting to get off track because they're calling income, they're kind of equating it to wages, but you're going to find out that that's not true. But here they're very aware of the fact that people's wages were not subject to the income tax, and we'll find out why. The Treasury cannot, by interpretive regulations, make income of that which is not income within the meaning of the Revenue Acts of Congress, nor can Congress, without apportionment, tax as income that which is not income within the meaning of the 16th Amendment. Now, I was debating on whether to put in anything on the two types of taxation. One is direct, by apportionment, by population, and the other is indirect, like alcohol tax, tobacco tax, firearms taxes. Those are uniform. Somebody in Maine pays the same as somebody in California. Everybody pays the same. The other one is a direct tax, which has to be apportioned. Now, that gets into a whole nother subject, but and that's one of the egregious actions that they're using. They are taxing us outside of those two forms illegally. Now, let's get back to that quote about 3.9% of the population. Can you possibly believe that in 1936 there was only 3.9% of the entire population of America working and making wages that they're trying to call income? The issue was that most Americans were not making profits which were derived from their wages that were subject to the income tax. And here's an example. You make $1,000 a month and it takes you $900 to completely live on for the whole month. You're doing great. I know it's pretty low, but let's just look at it. 1936 dollars, that would have been great. You take that extra $100 and put it into the bank. It derives what? Interest for you. The tax on income limitations for most Americans at that time prevented them from being subject to the income tax because their wages were not the income, and only gain and profit above the deductions was taxable. The profit and gain derived from their wages, in other words, interest or gain from other, or it could be you've got an apartment complex and you're making money off of that asset. That is what is income. Let's look at another Supreme Court, or as 26 USC, United States Code annotated, meaning it is solid, it is unrefutable. Under the Internal Revenue Act of 1954, if there is no gain, there is no income. Okay, let's look at that. The IRS says your wages are all gain and profit, but the courts say that is a lie, as we've just seen. Let's look at this. There must be gain before there is income within the 16th Amendment. And that's under United States Code annotated again. Constitutional Amendment 16, which is another fraud, which is a whole other subject. Another case, the word income has a well-defined meaning before the amendment of the Constitution was adopted, the 16th. It has been defined in all of the courts of this country. If we could call anything that we pleased income, we would obliterate all the distinction between income and principal. The Congress cannot affect the meaning of the word income by any legislation whatsoever. Again, 1913. This was well understood back then, but we have gone to sleep as a people on the Constitution, the rule of law, everything. Okay, what did it say? It talked about a distinction, income and principal. Principal is the source of income, not the income itself. Income is derived from principal. Yet the IRS is taxing all of your principal, your wages, as income, profit, and gain, as if it costs you nothing to be able to produce those wages. Income is gain or profit. It is not your wages. Another court case. Reasonable compensation for labor or services rendered is not profit. 1946. They still knew it then, but it was changing, and it was changing rapidly. And people were going to sleep. You know, we're talking about the close of the Second World War, when virtually the whole nation went to sleep and slumber, and it's been going on for 50 years, but people are waking up, and this is part of it. Let's look at this. The phraseology of Form 1040 is somewhat obscure, but it matters little. The statute and the statute alone determines what is income to be taxed. It taxes income derived from many different sources. One does not derive income by rendering services and charging for them. I mean, how plain do these guys have to be before people understand what's going on? Note Webster's dictionary, and it defines derived as to obtain from a parent substance. The property or compensation would be the parent substance, and the gain or profit would be a separate derivative obtained from the substance or property or compensation. From means to show removal or separation. And a little bit of the emphasis in there, underlining and what have you, is mine. Okay, remember the example of $100 making interest? Okay, let's look a little farther. Simply put, pay from a job is a wage, and wages are not taxable. Congress has taxed income, not compensation, or wages and salary. That's a United States Supreme Court case. It's 1969. Still, there was some remembrance of it, but people were being conned through the whole thing. Some people apparently were challenging it. Now let's look at some 1909 congressional records. This was debate, and this is unrefuted testimony showing where they were going with the whole concept of income taxation. Mr. Heflin, an income tax seeks to reach the what? Unearned wealth of the country. In other words, the interest that you got, the $100, you didn't earn that. That was unearned. The same as the billionaires and trillionaires and all these other guys out there, however rich they are, they're making money hand over fist and not paying a penny on it. And that was what they were trying to do, was to reach the income of that. And here again, the income tax seeks to reach the unearned wealth of the country to make it pay its share. And again, but sir, when you tax a man on his income, it is because his property is productive. Remember the derived from? It's producing something. He pays out of his abundance because he has got the abundance. I hope this is starting to make a little sense here. Some more. The poor man or the man in moderate circumstances does not regard his wages or salary as an income that would have to pay its proportionate tax under this new system. In other words, the taxation system, the 16th Amendment. And that's Governor Wilson. And I don't even know what governor he was. It probably looks like, well, I don't know where it was. But anyway, 1911. And that was when these things were being proposed, and it was 1913 when the income tax was officially adopted, or allegedly officially adopted. Well, let's look at what else is income. Income tax. This is Henry Black's law dictionary, one of the most prestigious dictionaries in the world. Income tax, a tax on the yearly profits arising from property, professions, and trades and offices. Okay, and we've gone into that before. Remember, derived from. Another one here, income tax. An income tax is a tax which relates to product or income from property or from business pursuits. Clicking yet? The term income tax includes a tax on the gross receipts of a corporation or business. Now, the word includes, a lot of people think when you see includes, It's meaning, a tax on gross receipts of a corporation or business, and wages, salary, or compensation for services, and everything else that exists under the sun. All that is what is classified as income. No. There's a whole nother chapter that we could do on just the word income, or includes, and how it is very select in what it means. If it says includes, it means it is limited to this. So it was very precise. Here's a United States Supreme Court. Simply put, pay from a job is a wage, and wages are not taxable. Congress has taxed income, not compensation or salaries and wages. Now, are we beginning to understand the scam here? It's so egregious, it just irks me when I think about it. It's just egregious and it's just horrible. Let's look at another United States Supreme Court. Income, should include profit gained through a sale or conversion of capital assets. Again, profit gained. There would seem to be no room to doubt that the word must be given the same meaning in all of the income tax acts of Congress that it was given to it in the Corporation Excise Tax Act. And what that meaning is has now been definitely settled by the decisions of this Supreme Court. In determining the definition of the word income thus arrived at, this court has consistently refused to enter into the refinements of lexicographers or economists, and has approved, in the definitions quoted, what is believed to be the commonly understood meaning of the term gains and profits, which must have been in the minds of the people when they adopted the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. They knew this. 1923. It was clear. It was understood. Another case, United States Supreme Court. There is a clear distinction between profit and wages, or compensation for labor. Compensation for labor cannot be regarded as profit within the meaning of the law. The word profit is a different thing altogether from mere compensation for labor. The claim that salaries, wages, and compensation for personal services are to be taxed as an entirety and therefore must be returned by the individual who performed the services which produce the gain is without support either in the language of the act or in the decisions of the courts construing it, and is directly opposed to provisions of the act and to the regulations of the Treasury Department. Now notice, this is 1976. Again, the word there, they're starting to mix some of this stuff up. This is how the deception works. It's very slow. Notice that they say that must be returned by the individual who performed the services which produced the gain. See, right there in that very statement, they're countering their previous cites and their own testimony on what gain was and what it wasn't. And this is where it's starting to get obfuscated, and that was 1976. How long ago? That was almost 50 years ago. And it was how many years before that? It's been a slow, long process, but here we're seeing hints of it, but it was still being held to a certain standard. But it didn't take long for it to get butchered, and we went right down the wrong road. Now here's an interesting quote. It says, "Let me point this out now. Your income tax is 100% voluntary tax." In other words, I'll put this in there. When you file that 1040 form and you sign that, you are voluntarily self-assessing yourself, stating that you have lawful taxable income. And when you sign it, you're signing that under oath and penalty of perjury that you have true income. You don't. You're committing perjury when you do that. Again, your income tax is 100% voluntary tax, and your liquor tax is 100% enforced tax. Now the situation is as different as day and night. Consequently, your same rules just will not apply. In other words, this is the head of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Tax Division of the Bureau of Internal Revenue. And he was doing this testifying before Congress. Now he states right in there I mean, if the income tax is a mandatory tax, why would he make the distinction here, 1953, that there was a clear distinction between the income tax as a voluntary tax and the liquor tax, which is one that you have to pay. If you buy a beer, you buy a bottle of wine, you have to pay that tax that's on that, or you don't. It's a voluntary one there. You don't have to pay that. But if you buy the tax, you are paying that tax. You cannot get out of paying that tax if you buy the alcohol or the firearms or the tobacco or any other excise tax that's out there. Now let's look at this one. Lucas v. Earl, United States Supreme Court, 1930. The claim that salaries, wages, and compensation for personal service are to be taxed as an entirety and therefore must be returned by the individual who has performed the services. Again, this is more of a quote. Is without support either in the language of the act or in the decisions of the courts construing it. Some of them times they quote other courts and they quote each other, they quote themselves. Not only this, but it is directly opposed to the provisions of the act and to the regulations of the U.S. Treasury Department, which either prescribed or permits that compensations for personal service not be taxed as an entirety and not be returned by the individual performing the services. Now here's where it really gets it. It has to be noted that by the language of the act, it is not salaries, wages, or compensation for personal services that are to be included in gross income. That which is to be included in gains, profits, and income derived from salaries, wages, or compensation for personal services. How many times do they have to say it before we really understand it? Are you convinced yet? You know, there are dozens of other court cases that are in the documents, what is income, and that will direct you to at the end of this thing, which we're getting pretty close to. But let's review a little bit. Income is not your wages, salary, or compensation for services. Income is a corporate profit or an activity that is taxable. If you're a corporation and you're incorporated, that is a government privilege, and that becomes a taxable activity. Income is a gain or profit severed from your wages, the profit that your wages produced, if it does in fact produce any profit or income, because if it takes every penny for you to go from month to month, there's no profit there, absolutely zero. Now look at this case here. United States Supreme Court. The freedman right to earn a living through any lawful occupation is exempt from taxation by the federal government. Amazing. 1936, 1943, 1966, 1944. See how we've been deceived over the time? The IRS is essentially saying that your labor is all gain and that you have no expenses, zero expenses, to be able to produce those wages. All corporations have expenses to deduct, and we all know that. If you have a business, you deduct those things, and it allows them to be able to produce their product, whatever expenses, which are not counted as income or gain or profit. That stuff that they spend on all of those expenses is not classified as income. So do you. What does it cost you to be able to work? What about your home, your car, gas, food, medical expenses, electricity, entertainment, insurance? We could go on and on and on. You could make a list. All of those are expenses you incur to be able to produce labor. All those expenses go into your labor, supporting the value of your labor. Your labor is an exchange for your work. Now you've agreed to exchange your labor for your wages, right? Your labor has value. You paid a lot to be able to produce it. It is not worthless and all profit. Your compensation for that labor is an even exchange of your labor for your wages on carrying on living. United States Supreme Court. Included in the right of personal liberty and the right of private property are taking the nature of each is the right to make contracts for the acquisition of property. The chief among such contracts, instead of personal employment, by which in labor and other services are exchanged for money or other forms of property. okay, in which the labor and other services are exchanged for money or other forms of property. If this right be struck down or arbitrarily interfered with, this is a substantial impairment of liberty, in the long established constitutional sense. The right is as essential to the laborer as to the capitalist, to the poor as to the rich, for the vast majority of persons have no artist's way to begin to acquire property saving by working for money. You can get the money, you pay all your expenses, you have more left over, you can acquire more property, you can invest it, you can gain income. Basically, the IRS wants to suck the lifeblood out of Americans, and it has been doing it for almost 100 years, 1913. All right, some research material. If you really want to understand this, now this stuff, you can look at it and you can get all upset, and you might want to just, take off like a rocket, but you need to sit back and look at this. Consider yourself a general in a war, and you're looking at this enemy that's out there, this Goliath, this beast, and you say, okay, what do I have to do? Here are the tools, here's the law, here are the rules, here's the Constitution. Educate yourself. That's the biggest key. Even if it takes you another year and you don't do anything, just educate yourself. Go to that website right there, foundationfortruthinlaw.org/files, capital F /2-IRS-documents, and that 2 just means the second directory. And then go to the W's. I mean, the whole thing is full of documents that are going to blow you away, but go to the W's and read the what is income docs and the other docs on that topic, and this will fill in a lot of the gaps. There's a lot of other cases in there and explanation of some of this stuff. And like I said, please get this out to people, and you have to make a decision. You might look at this and you think, nope, I don't believe it, I think it's a fraud, I think it's a lie, the quotes are all made up. Well, just do a Google on the quotes. I will tell you this though, there are a few where they're now going in and actually perverting the court rulings and cites themselves. And I have a book here, and I should have pulled it out, but I don't remember which one it is, but I think it was the Lucas, where some of that quote was taken out, and most of the quotes that are out there on the internet now have taken that quote out of it. But I've got the original transcript document that shows that it was in the original. So these guys are trying to pervert it now because people are waking up. People like me, people like you, people, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that are understanding this stuff and starting to make a stand. And and we could leave it there, but you need to at least begin creating a paper trail. It does not hurt to simply write a letter to the IRS, to the whomever, and you can give this same letter and ask it from your IRS preparer, from H&R Block. Just go to them and say, hey, I just want to know where is it defined, where is income defined, where is it that I'm made a taxpayer, as we discussed in the first video, and you should go through that. If you need to go through them a few times, just remember, if you're going to do this, you're entering into a battle, a war, but you want to go in very well prepared. And if you do it, just remember that you need to start the paper trail, because then they cannot come after you criminally, because you're proving that you believe absolutely that you are not personally liable for this so-called income tax. And they cannot do it criminally, but they'll still try to do it illegally and unconstitutionally and without due process by trying to go after your bank account or your house or whatever it is. So protect yourself. Then there are ways to do it. The rich do it all the time. It's not tax shelters. It's not tax scams. It's totally legal. But build a paper trail. Challenge it all, and I misspelled challenge there. But challenge everything. Ask them. You got to find out, why are you doing what you're doing? You have to do this. So go to those websites. There's questions that you can look at on that back one. Let's go back there again. These actually have templates for questions you can ask, and format it for yourself. Ask the questions that you feel you want to ask, the real legitimate well, you know, I don't know the answer to this, and I really want to know. Play dumb. Just send, hey, I want to know this, but I'm going to give you a heads up now. You'll probably get a letter back stating, well, it appears that you are a tax protester, or that you're challenging the legality of the income tax, and we're not going to answer any questions like this. If you want answers, you have to go to the courts for the answers. Well, as I stated in the first video, I've been in 10 courts, including the United States Supreme Court, and every single one of them avoided all of these questions completely. They wouldn't dare touch them. They totally ignored it. The IRS ignored it, and the United States Supreme Court, the IRS actually filed a motion, you know, to just, they said nope, we're waiving our right to file any response. That's a default in any court in the world, but not the United States Supreme Court. Technically it is, but again, that shows you how the corruption has progressed. So remember that, as I mentioned, you need to protect your assets like the rich do, but the IRS is basically a lawless domestic terrorist organization that has the courts deceived as well, or they're willingly complicit in this fraud. So like I mentioned, they will try to do civil things like they're trying to do to me, but if you're protected, and you have nothing that they can go after. So prepare, save all paper from them, always respond to them, always respond with questions, with challenges, but never just let it go, because that's called a default, and if you acquiesce, then they look at it as being a fact in law, and then they can move on that. So always challenge, and that's a good paper trail. Certified mail, return receipt requested, or just do it certified mail and get the return receipt copy from the U.S. Postal Service website. But keep names, especially names of signed people, agents that have signed, that can be used in a court case against them down the road by you personally, which is not hard to do. Record all your IRS conversations on the phone or in person with a recorder. Never trust them in anything at all that they say. Okay, never. Okay, next time we're going to look at some tangents of this as to IRS jurisdiction, government jurisdiction, and who are you? Do you even know who you are as a human being? What are you? Are you an actual human being, or are you a corporation? Are you a subject of the government? Let's look at the federal government's jurisdiction. Where do they have jurisdiction? Where don't they have jurisdiction? And be ready to be even more irritated at what has been pulled over our eyes. So until then, we've got a good number of videos coming up when I can get to them. I've got a lot on my plate, but please pass it on. Please like this video series. Please subscribe to it. Pass it to your list. Pass it to everybody, and get their opinion on it. Have them look at it and ask them to say, okay, give me an answer to what these courts are saying and how it's countering what the IRS and other agencies and everybody else is saying and believing. What are those courts saying? Are they all deceived? Are they all wrong? No, they're not. So hang in there, fight the good fight, and we'll see you next time.